In the last few years, property has grown exponentially in value across all Western cities. For many young people, this means that they are priced out of the property market. There has been consistent calls on the government to deliver policies that make property more affordable to young people. But despite all this, it seems like the price of property just keeps going up and up, leaving so many young people trapped out of the property market and not realizing their dream of owning a home. So in today's video, I'm going to break down step by step what you need to do in order to secure your first home loan. Now, the first thing that you need to do is get a rough idea of how much you can actually borrow from the bank. To do this, you can go on any bank's website and search for their pre-home loan approval calculator. Simply enter in your income and expenses, and the calculator will give you a rough estimate of how much you can borrow. Just bear in mind though that these things aren't entirely accurate, and it's likely that you won't be able to borrow as much as what the calculator estimates due to the banks only loaning conservative amounts during the pandemic. So for example, if the calculator says that you can borrow $600,000, it's likely that you'll only be able to borrow about $500,000. So it's always best to check. The second thing that you will need are copies of your pay slips from the last 3 months if you are full-time employed, or the last 6 months if you are casually employed. Banks require this so that they can verify that you have a stable and steady income and that you didn't just receive a huge lump sum payment in 1 month, and then your income is low for the rest of the year. Now, the third thing that you will need is a copy of your employment contract or letter. This is required so that banks can verify that you have a stable and secure job and haven't just made up your yearly salary. Banks will check that the salary on your employment contract matches the pay slips that you have provided. The next thing that banks will require is a copy of your tax return for the last 2 or 3 years. Again, banks require this to ensure that you haven't just had one really successful year and then went on to have a second or third poor income year. Now, the advantage of doing this is that it shows your full income for the whole tax year. So banks also take into account any money that you've made on interest, shares, or rent. Just bear in mind that banks also take into account how much money you put towards your tax deductions, as they're only interested in how much money you take home. So if you are someone that is claiming a lot of tax reductions, this is likely going to reduce how much you can borrow. Lastly, banks are going to want to see copies of your bank statements for the last 6 months. This is so they can check that you are actually able to make the payments and are financially responsible. And they'll look at everything here, from transport costs to grocery bills, school fees, recreation, and even your entertainment subscriptions. They do this to make sure that if you're earning, let's say, $5,000 a month after tax, that you're not burning through $10,000 a month and running at a deficit. You'll also need to show to the banks that you have about 3 to 6 months of cash reserves on top of everything that you're paying towards your house deposit. Okay, so let's now talk about how you actually save up for a house deposit. We're going to assume a number of things here. Firstly, we'll go off the median house price in Sydney, which according to research by Budget Direct is $872,934. So generally speaking, you will need to save at least 20% of the property value in order to secure the home loan, which in this case is $174,586. Next, you'll need to pay for stamp duty, which in this case is $35,103. There's the cost of land transfer, mortgage registration, conveyancing, and legal fees, which for simplicity's sake, we'll say comes out to about $2,000. You're also going to need an additional 3 to 6 months of cash reserves to make sure that after the deal goes through, you can continue paying for the mortgage. It's important to have this money saved anyway, in case you lose your job or your financial situation changes whilst you're paying off the mortgage. So let's assume this comes to about $30,000 in extra cash. Adding all of that up, we get to about $240,000 that you need to have saved up total in cash. So how do we do this? So step one is the acknowledgement that this is something achievable if you put in the time and the diligence. Obviously, saving up $240,000 is going to seem like an unachievable task for many people. But I want to stress that this really is possible. It's not going to be an overnight success. It's only going to be possible if you make this your financial priority over the next 5 to 10 years. This is going to involve some serious commitment, dedication, and the ability to delay gratification. But is it worth it? The answer, in my opinion, is a resounding yes. Owning your own property gives you so many benefits. Like when you finally pay off the mortgage and no longer have to pay rent. You also see the price of your property increase in value as you're paying off the mortgage. And you also don't have to pay capital gains tax on your primary residence. This all really comes down to your ability to make sacrifices today in order to delay gratification. I think in today's world, we've really become addicted to instant gratification and snackable content. Receiving likes on Instagram, next day delivery on Amazon, the ability to order food and have it delivered straight away. It's as if our ability to critically think, make sacrifices, and work hard in order to pursue bigger goals that provide a deeper level of fulfillment has largely been lost. Saving up for a house or really anything in life requires you to rise above all of these distractions. Now, this brings me to my next point, which is actually creating a written plan and budget. To do this, you'll just need to work out how much money you're taking home on a monthly basis, and then deduct all relevant expenses. Now, there's a lot of YouTubers who advocate for using websites or apps to help you track your expenses. I don't actually think you need to use any of these. The whole point of a budget is to just work out where your expenses are going and then just cut down from there. And I'm not saying that you need to become a hermit, but it will take some sacrificing in order to cut down and save. You should try to limit your expenses as much as possible, particularly when it comes down to these smaller things like takeaway lunches and coffees that end up adding up to larger amounts. And I actually have a more detailed video here that tells you in more detail how you can cut down on these things. Regardless of how much money you actually save from this, I guarantee you that you will save more by creating a budget and identifying what you need to cut down on, rather than just saving what you have left over at the end of the month. In fact, Dave Ramsey, who owns hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate, says adults devise a plan and stick to it. Children do what feels good. So if we consider someone who's earning $80,000, which is $63,000 after tax, that person could very easily save up the $240,000 that's required in less than 10 years if they diligently saved 50% of their income every year. And in fact, they could probably do it in even less time, given that their income will probably increase over that period as well. Which brings me to my third step, which is getting a second job or a side hustle. You'll hear me talk a lot on this channel about getting a second job or a side hustle is so important to get ahead financially. And when we consider the property market, you are effectively bidding against other people who are likely to have a similar amount of savings to you. This means that you effectively have to outbid the other people at the auction in order to secure the property. And in order to get ahead of the competition, you will need to earn and save as much additional income as possible. So for example, if your full-time job is a 9 to 5, you effectively have about an extra 3 hours or so in the evenings and an extra 8 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday to earn extra money. That's over 30 hours a week of additional income that you could be making a week. Again, this isn't something that's going to make a huge difference overnight, but will make a very big difference in the long run. If you have a lot of skills that are useful to other people, you can create a profile on Upwork and advertise your services. You can then contact people on there who are willing to make payments for contracted work. Otherwise, you can even just get a part-time job that will employ you on the weekends or on the weeknights, such as food delivery or being an Uber driver. Having a solid side hustle or a second-time job can really add up to an additional $20,000 in yearly savings, drastically reducing the amount of time that you need to save for your house deposit. I did tutoring all throughout 2020 and managed to save up an extra $15,000 on top of my full-time job. And of course, this is only one extra form of income that you can make. There are many other sources of income that you can make in addition to your full-time job. Like for example, with YouTube. I'm hoping that one day this channel does eventually get monetized and I can bring in an additional source of income. This finally brings me to step 4, which is to consider investing money whilst you are saving. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, but I believe it may be a good idea to actually put some of your savings away into the stock market whilst you are saving for a house deposit. And the reason why I say this is because your savings actually go down in value whilst you are saving due to inflation and CPI. So let's say, for example, someone who has managed to save $30,000 consistently every single year and has finally reached their target of $240,000 after 8 years. That initial $60,000 that they saved in years 1 and 2 is actually going to devalue by an average of 4.5% every single year until year 8, when they have saved up $240,000. It's also likely that during this time, house prices increase as well, just further blowing out the amount of time required to save. Now let's say that the $60,000 saved after 2 years is now invested in the S&P 500 index. Assuming an average return of 10% a year, that $60,000 could be worth almost $100,000 by the end of year 8. Of course, it's important to remember though that this is just an average return. No one knows where the share market is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. It could actually crash during this time, resulting in you having to save up even more money over a longer period of time. Alternatively, it could just balloon to new highs during this period. Again, this isn't financial advice, but it could be worth investing some of your initial savings into an ETF if you think that you'll need to save over 5 years for a house deposit. If you don't invest in the stock market, then it might be a good idea to consider putting your savings away into a high interest savings account and switching every time the rate expires. Regardless, investing some of your savings into the stock market is probably not going to make much of a difference at the end of the day, because it ultimately just comes down to diligent saving and sacrificing immediate needs for long-term reward. Many people aren't prepared to make these sacrifices for a long period of time. It's definitely worth it though. Buying a home is one of the most satisfying purchases that you can make over buying anything else with a significant amount of savings.